The last thing Private Martinez transmitted before he disappeared was a child's voice counting backward from 10 in Ukrainian. That was 3 days ago. We found his radio this morning, still broadcasting on loop. Desyat, devyat, vosem. The voice isn't Martinez. It's coming from 60 feet underground, from beneath a mass grave that's been sealed for 73 years. And every 12 hours, the count drops by one number. Yesterday, it reached 0. My name is Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, Force Recon Marines. What I'm about to tell you happened in March 2022, 2 weeks into what the world was calling Putin's special operation. The Pentagon classified this incident and transferred everyone involved to different units within 48 hours. They were covering up the fact that some wars never end. They just go underground and wait February 28, 2022. Officially, no American forces were operating in Ukraine. Unofficially, 12 Marines from 2nd Force Reconnaissance had been embedded with Ukrainian Special Forces since January, training them in behind-the-lines operations. Our mission was ghost work. Slip in, teach advanced reconnaissance techniques, slip out. Standard Black Ops doctrine. What wasn't standard was the location our Ukrainian partners had chosen for final exercises. A collective farm 40 kilometers northeast of Kharkiv that had been abandoned since 1932. The place had the kind of history that makes locals cross themselves and take longer routes to avoid it. During the Holodomor, Stalin's engineered famine, 3,000 Ukrainian children had starved to death on this exact plot of land. The Soviets had bulldozed the entire settlement afterward, built a collective farm over the graves, then abandoned it when the soil wouldn't grow anything but weeds. Cursed ground, our Ukrainian liaison, Captain Petrov, had said matter-of-factly during the briefing. But perfect for training. No civilians for 50 kilometers. No infrastructure Russians want to capture. The farm buildings were typical Soviet-era concrete. Functional, brutal, designed to last centuries whether anyone wanted them to or not. We'd set up our operations center in the main administrative building. 2 stories of reinforced concrete with windows positioned like firing ports and walls thick enough to stop artillery. My team was lean and experienced. Corporal Doc Williams, our medic and communications specialist. Lance Corporal Sarah Chen, sniper and our best long-range reconnaissance asset. Private First Class Martinez, explosives and close quarters battle. And me, 13 years in the Corps, 2 deployments in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. Old enough to know when something felt wrong. The first 48 hours were routine. We ran night exercises with the Ukrainians, practiced infiltration techniques, worked on advanced surveillance protocols. Professional soldiers doing professional work. The Ukrainians were good, disciplined, motivated, experienced from 8 years of fighting in the Donbass. But there were details that nagged at me. The way local wildlife avoided the area completely. No birds, no rabbits, nothing. The way our equipment kept malfunctioning in specific locations, particularly near the old grain silos. The way conversations would suddenly die when we walked past certain spots, as if sound itself was being absorbed into the ground. Martinez noticed it first. Kid had grown up in El Paso, spent his childhood exploring abandoned buildings and construction sites. He had an instinct for places that weren't quite right. "Sergeant," he said on our second night, "you ever been somewhere that feels like it's listening?" I had. But not like this. The third night brought the first anomaly. Chen was on overwatch in the silo tower when she reported movement in the abandoned housing complex 800 meters south. Multiple heat signatures, she reported. Small, moving in formation. Russian reconnaissance? Negative, Sergeant. Too small. And they're moving wrong, like they're not used to walking. Doc checked our thermal imaging from the operations center. Confirmed multiple signatures. But Sergeant, his voice carried that tone medics get when they see something that doesn't match their training. The signatures are cold. Colder than ambient temperature. Cold signatures meant one thing, the dead. But the dead didn't move in formation. Martinez volunteered to investigate. Standard reconnaissance protocol: 1 man, light kit, observe and report. He moved out at 2300 hours with night vision, thermal imaging, and a radio check every 15 minutes. His first transmission came at 23:15. Multiple structures showing signs of recent habitation. Fresh footprints in the mud, but static crackled across the radio. Sergeant, these prints are small, like child-sized, and they're everywhere. 2,330. Moving closer to housing complex. Can hear voices. Sounds like, Jesus, it sounds like kids singing. Some kind of lullaby. 2345. Contact. I've got eyes on targets. Sergeant, you're not going to believe this. That was Martinez's last coherent transmission. At 0000 hours exactly, his radio crackled to life one final time. But the voice that came through wasn't Martinez speaking English. It was a child's voice speaking Ukrainian. Desyat. 10. Doc tried to raise Martinez for 6 hours straight. No response except that single word, repeating every hour on the hour from his radio frequency. Devyat, Vosim, Sem, 9, 8, 7. By dawn, Chen had the housing complex under constant surveillance through her scope. No movement, she reported. No heat signatures, nothing. It's like whatever was there just vanished. Captain Petrov's face went pale when we played him the radio transmissions. That word, he said quietly. Desyat. It's how children learn to count during Holodomor. Count your grains of wheat. Count your days of hunger. Count backward from your last meal. What are you talking about, Captain? My babusha told stories. When food ran out, parents would teach children to count backward from 10. When count reached 0, he made the sign of the cross. Child would die. Doc was working frantically with the radio equipment, trying to triangulate Martinez's position. Sergeant, his radio is active and transmitting, but the signal is coming from underground, maybe 60, 70 feet down. Underground? That's impossible. Martinez was investigating surface structures. I'm telling you what the equipment says. Signal is definitely subterranean. Chen had been studying satellite imagery on her tablet. Sergeant, look at this. She showed us aerial photos from different decades. 1950s, the area shows clear foundation lines under the soil. 1960s, those lines are gone, covered over. But if you look at the ground-penetrating radar data from the Ukrainian survey team, the screen showed a network of passages and chambers stretching beneath the entire collective farm like a spiderweb. Root cellars, Petrov explained. During collectivization, farmers dug secret storage tunnels to hide grain from Stalin's requisition teams. When famine came, families lived underground for months trying to survive on whatever they had hidden. And when they died, they were buried where they fell. Entire underground city of the dead. The counting continued. Every hour on the hour, Martinez's radio would crackle to life with that child's voice dropping one number. By noon, it had reached Chitair, 4. That's when Chen reported new movement. Multiple signatures emerging from the housing complex, she said, her voice tight. But Sergeant, they're not human signatures. They're showing up on thermal as cold spots against the ground temperature. Through my binoculars, I could see what she meant. Dark shapes were moving between the abandoned buildings, but they flickered in and out of visibility like heat mirages in reverse. When they moved, they left no footprints. When they stopped, the temperature around them dropped enough to create visible vapor clouds. "Contact," Doc reported suddenly. "I'm picking up multiple radio transmissions on emergency frequencies. All of them children's voices. All of them counting in Ukrainian. The radio filled with an overlapping chorus. Try, Dive, Odin, 3, 2, 1, then silence. At exactly 1300 hours, Martinez's voice came through clearly for the first time in 13 hours. "Sergeant Morrison, do you copy?" "Martinez! Report your status." "I'm okay, Sergeant. I'm with the children. They've been showing me around." His voice sounded strange, younger somehow, lighter. "You should come down. There's so much food here. More food than anyone could ever eat." Doc and I exchanged glances. Martinez had been carrying 3 days of MRES when he disappeared. Trained Marines didn't talk about abundance when they'd been missing for half a day. "Martinez, what's your position?" "Underground, in the storage chambers. The children brought me here when the cold started. They're taking care of me." Static crackled across the transmission. "Sergeant, they say you're all invited for dinner. There's plenty for everyone." Chen's voice cut through from Overwatch. "Movement on all sides. The cold signatures are surrounding our position." I grabbed my rifle and moved to the window. The area around our building was filling with shapes that shouldn't exist. Translucent forms that flickered in and out of visibility. All of them small. All of them moving with the careful, measured steps of chronic malnutrition. "How many?" I asked Chen. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. And Sergeant?" Her voice cracked slightly. "They're carrying bowls. Empty bowls." The temperature inside our concrete bunker began to drop. Not gradually, suddenly, as if someone had opened a freezer door. Our breath began to fog. Ice crystals formed on the radio equipment. Martinez's voice returned, but this time it was overlaid with other voices, children's voices, all speaking in unison. "You must be so hungry. Come down and eat with us. There's bread that never runs out. Soup that's always warm." Doc was monitoring our equipment. "Sergeant, Martinez's biometrics are going crazy. Heart rate is spiking, then dropping to almost nothing. Body temperature is..." He paused, double-checking his readings. "Body temperature is dropping below survivable levels." "He's dying?" "He's already dead. Has been for hours. But something is still transmitting using his radio." The cold signatures had reached our building. Through the windows, I could see children's faces pressed against the glass, hollow-eyed, gaunt, with the distended bellies of starvation. But they were transparent, visible only as faint outlines that became clearer the colder the air became. One of them, a girl maybe 8 years old, tapped on the window with fingers like twigs. When she spoke, her voice came through Martinez's radio. "Please come eat with us. We've been waiting so long for guests." The glass began to frost over in patterns that looked almost like writing. Cyrillic letters spelling out words I couldn't read, but somehow understood. Hungry. So hungry. Always hungry. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with ghosts. We were dealing with hunger itself, given form and consciousness by 70 years of accumulated starvation. and it wanted us to join the feast that never ends. The children didn't break down the door. They seeped through it. One moment we were barricaded inside 2 feet of reinforced concrete. The next moment, translucent figures were materializing in the corners, along the walls, anywhere shadows gathered thick enough to hide their forms. They moved like smoke given shape, flickering in and out of visibility as the temperature continued to plummet. Chen had abandoned her overwatch position and fallen back to our defensive perimeter. "Sergeant, the thermal imaging is going insane. The entire building is showing cold signatures. It's like the walls themselves are occupied." The children didn't attack. They watched. And somehow, that was infinitely worse. Up close, I could see details that made my stomach clench. These weren't just generic ghost children from some horror movie. These were specific victims of specific atrocities, preserved in the exact state they died in. A boy wearing shoes made from newspaper, carefully folded and tied with string. A girl clutching a wooden spoon, her fingers positioned as if she were still trying to scrape the last bits of soup from an empty bowl. All of them were emaciated beyond anything I'd seen in modern war zones. These children had starved slowly, over months, watching their bodies consume themselves while they clung to whatever scraps of food their families could hide from Stalin's requisition squads. Doc was monitoring Martinez's radio frequency when the transmission shifted. Instead of just Martinez's voice, we could hear conversation. Martinez talking to children, children responding in Ukrainian, laughter that sounded like wind through dried wheat stalks. "Martinez, report your position," I commanded. "I'm in the feast hall, Sergeant," came his reply. The children showed me where the real food is stored. There's enough here to feed an army. One of the children in our room, a boy maybe 10 years old, wearing clothes patched with what looked like burlap sacks, stepped forward and spoke in accented English. "Your friend is safe. He is eating with us, but he cannot leave until the hunger is satisfied." "What hunger?" "Our hunger. The hunger that never ends." The boy's voice carried an authority that seemed impossible for his apparent age. "I am Dmitri. I was 13 when I died, but I'd been managing food for my family since I was 8. 6 younger siblings, parents too weak to work, grandmother who needed medicine we could not afford." As he spoke, the other children began to arrange themselves in a rough circle around us, not threatening, more like students gathering around a teacher. I learned to count grains of wheat, to divide single potatoes into 7 portions, to make 1 cup of milk last 3 days. I became very good at making nothing into something. Dimitri's hollow eyes fixed on mine. But even nothing has limits. Doc was still monitoring the radio when Martinez's voice returned, clearer than it had been since he disappeared. "Sergeant, you need to see this place. They've got storage chambers that go on for kilometers. Grain silos that are still full after all these years." "Martinez, describe your exact location." "Underground, maybe 50 feet down. The children have been living here since." Static filled the channel. "Since they died. They've been waiting for someone to share their food with." Dmitri nodded as if he could hear Martinez's transmission. "Your friend found our home. The place where we kept what little we could save from Stalin's men." Captain Petrov, who had been silent since the children appeared, finally spoke. "The underground storage network." My babusha told stories. Families dug connecting tunnels between root cellars, created hidden chambers where they could store grain away from the requisition squads. And when the families died, They were buried in the same chambers with their hidden food. Parents thought maybe, in death, they could guard what they had tried so hard to save in life. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. We weren't just in a building built over a mass grave. We were sitting on top of an underground city, kilometers of tunnels and chambers where entire families had lived, hidden, starved, and died together. A place where the boundary between the living and the dead had been erased by shared suffering. Chen was studying her tablet, cross-referencing geological surveys with historical records. Sergeant, according to Soviet documentation, they sealed the underground chambers in 1933 after the last family died, pumped them full of concrete to prevent disease. But the chambers weren't empty when they sealed them, Dmitri said quietly. We were still there, still hungry, still counting our last grains of wheat. The radio crackled again, but this time multiple voices came through. Martinez and what sounded like dozens of children, all talking at once. The bread here never runs out. Soup that's always warm. Milk that tastes like summer. Everything you could ever want to eat. But underneath the words about abundance, I could hear something else. The sound of empty spoons scraping against empty bowls. The sound of Martinez's stomach rumbling with hunger, despite his claims of endless food. It's not real, I said to Dmitri. The food he's describing. It's not real. It is real to the hungry, Dmitri replied. When you starve long enough, the idea of food becomes more important than food itself, more nourishing than food itself. Doc had been running diagnostics on our equipment when his face went pale. Sergeant, I'm picking up biomedical data from Martinez's gear. His body is in advanced stages of starvation. Blood sugar near zero. Muscle mass deteriorating rapidly. He's dying of hunger while describing feasts. How is that possible? Because he's sharing our hunger, said a new voice. A girl, maybe 9 years old, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times, it was more patches than original fabric. When you eat with the starved, you become starved. It's the only way we can be together. The children began to move closer, not threatening, but pleading. Their translucent hands reached toward us with gestures that were heartbreakingly familiar. The universal body language of people asking for food. Please, Dmitri said, come down and eat with us. We have been alone so long. Your friend Martinez, he understands now. He knows what it means to be truly hungry. Martinez's voice confirmed it. Sergeant, you have to experience this. The children, they're showing me what hunger really is. Real hunger, not just missing a meal. The kind of hunger that makes you understand what's really important. But his voice was getting weaker, more distant, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a very deep well. Chen grabbed my arm. Sergeant, Martinez's GPS signal just went dark, but before it cut out, it showed his position as 200 feet underground. There's no way natural caves go that deep. The tunnels change, Petrov explained, his voice barely a whisper. During the worst times, when families were dying, they say the underground chambers began to shift and expand on their own. Hunger itself was digging deeper, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. Through the windows, more children were gathering, hundreds of them now, all pressed against the glass, all holding empty bowls, all staring at us with expressions of desperate hope. We know you have food, Dmitri said gently. We can smell it on you. The MRES in your packs, the energy bars, the water that isn't mixed with sawdust. We don't want to take it from you. What do you want? We want you to share it with us. We want you to understand what it means to divide 4 crackers among 40 people, to make 1 sip of water last until tomorrow, to fall asleep hungry and wake up hungrier. The radio sparked to life one final time with Martinez's voice, but now it carried the hollow tone of someone speaking from very far away. "Sergeant, they're bringing more food, so much food, but I can't seem to swallow it." That's when I understood the trap we'd walked into. This wasn't about ghosts seeking revenge. This was about hunger seeking company. 70 years of accumulated starvation that had become a force of nature, drawing the living underground to share in suffering that could never be satisfied. And Martinez was already gone. Doc made the call that saved our lives, at least temporarily. We evacuate now, or we join Martinez in those tunnels. But when we tried to leave, the doors wouldn't open, not locked, sealed. The concrete around the doorframe had somehow fused solid, as if the building itself had decided we weren't allowed to leave. Chen tried the windows with the same result. The glass had become part of the wall, smooth and unbreakable. "The building is changing," Petrov whispered, staring at walls that seemed slightly different than they'd been minutes before. During Holodomor, survivors said the underground chambers would shift and seal themselves. Hungry places don't let go of potential food. The children watched our growing panic with expressions that might have been sympathy. They understood what it felt like to be trapped with no way out. Dmitri stepped closer, his translucent form more solid now, fed by our fear. "You cannot leave until you understand. Understanding requires experience. Experience requires sharing." That's when I felt it, the first hollow pang in my stomach. Not normal hunger, but something deeper. The gnawing emptiness of a body that had been without food for days. Doc checked his watch. "Sergeant, we ate MRES 6 hours ago. This isn't natural hunger, but it felt natural. It felt inevitable." The sensation spread through my body like a slow poison, making my hands shake, my vision blur. Around me, I could see Chen and Doc experiencing the same thing. The creeping weakness of starvation accelerated into minutes instead of weeks. "Now you begin to understand," said the girl in the patched dress. Her name was Anya, I somehow knew, though she hadn't told me. "Hunger is not just empty stomach. Hunger is empty everything. Empty hope, empty strength, empty will to continue." The radio crackled with Martinez's voice, but weaker now, distorted. "Sergeant, can't seem to finish eating. Always more room, always more empty." Chen had collapsed against the wall, clutching her rifle but too weak to lift it. "How long?" she gasped. "How long does it take?" "For some, weeks," Dmitri answered. "For others, days. For the very young." He gestured to the smallest children gathered around us. Hours. But we wouldn't last hours. Whatever was happening to us was accelerated, compressed. We were experiencing weeks of starvation in real time, our bodies burning through energy reserves that shouldn't have been possible to deplete so quickly. Doc was trying to stay clinical, taking our vitals even as his hands shook with metabolic tremors. Blood pressure dropping, heart rate erratic. This isn't just psychological. Something is physically draining our energy reserves. "The hungry feed on the fed," Anya explained. "Not your food, your fullness, your satisfaction, your ability to be satisfied. We take that and make it our own, and in return, you learn what we learned." The building continued to change around us. Passages appeared in walls that had been solid, leading down into darkness. The floor beneath our feet became translucent. showing glimpses of chambers far below where figures moved in the shadows. Through the new passages, more children emerged. Not just from this building, but from the entire network of underground chambers. Hundreds of them, all translucent, all emaciated, all carrying empty bowls and wearing clothes that had been mended past the point of function. 3,000 children died here, Dmitri said. 3,000 children who learned to count backward from their last meal. But counting backward means eventually you reach zero, and zero means ending. What do you want from us? We want you to help us count forward instead of backward. We want you to share what you have so we can finally have enough. But I was beginning to understand that enough was impossible for the truly starved. Starvation creates a void that can never be filled because it destroys the very capacity for satisfaction. These children weren't seeking food. They were seeking the ability to feel full again. The radio transmission from Martinez grew weaker. "Sergeant, they keep bringing food, but every bite makes me hungrier. Like eating makes the empty bigger." Chen tried to raise her weapon but lacked the strength. "We can't fight this. You can't fight hunger with bullets." She was right. We'd been trained for combat against human enemies, not against need itself made manifest. Every tactical doctrine we knew was useless against opponents who wanted us to share their suffering rather than simply die. Doc pulled out his medical kit with trembling hands. "Glucose tablets, high-energy supplements. If this is metabolic, maybe we can..." But when he tried to open the package, the tablets crumbled to dust. Not aged, drained. The energy had been leached out of them, leaving only empty calories that provided no nourishment. "Food cannot satisfy our hunger anymore," Anya explained gently. "We are beyond food. We need the memory of satisfaction, the feeling of enough. And the only way to share that feeling is for you to experience its absence." The passages leading down into the underground chambers were clearer now, inviting. I could see Martinez's gear scattered along one tunnel, his rifle, his pack, his radio still transmitting weakly, but no Martinez. "Where is he?" "He is with us," Dmitri said. "He is learning what we learned, how to survive on nothing, how to make empty feel like full, how to count days without counting toward ending." Petrov, who had been silent, suddenly spoke with the authority of someone remembering family stories. "There is way out. My babusha told me. During worse times, some families escaped the hunger chambers. How? They fed the hunger something it wanted more than their own satisfaction. They gave it. He struggled for words. They gave it memory of abundance. Not food, but the memory of what it felt like to be full." The children around us grew agitated at his words, flickering more rapidly between visible and invisible. They understood what he was suggesting. "One person remembers feast," Petrov continued. "Really remembers. Taste, smell, satisfaction, the feeling of too much food. And they give that memory to hungry. Hungry feeds on memory instead of person. And the person who gives the memory? They forget what satisfaction feels like. Forever. They can eat but never feel full. They become like us, but alive." It was a different kind of sacrifice than I'd expected. Not death, but the permanent loss of one of humanity's most basic pleasures. The ability to feel satisfied would be gone forever. Through the radio, Martinez's voice came one last time, barely a whisper. "Sergeant, I remember my mother's Sunday dinner, pot roast and mashed potatoes, feeling so full I couldn't move. As he spoke, his voice grew fainter, but the children around us grew more solid, more present. They were feeding on his memory of satisfaction, drawing strength from his recollection of abundance. But it wasn't enough. 3,000 starved children needed more than one memory of fullness. The building shuddered, and more passages opened, leading deeper underground. The invitation was clear. Come down and join the feast that never ends, where hunger itself is the only dish served. We had maybe minutes before the starvation drained us completely. Minutes to decide between joining Martinez in the chambers below or finding another way to feed the hunger that had been waiting 70 years for guests to share its table. Above us, I could hear helicopters, Russian search and rescue, probably drawn by our radio signals. But they would find an empty building, because empty was all this place knew how to create. The children pressed closer, their empty bowls extended toward us in the universal gesture of the starving. And despite everything, despite knowing what they were, I wanted to help them. That's when I knew we were already lost. The solution came from the last person I expected, Chen, barely conscious but still thinking like a Marine. The MRES, she whispered through blue lips. Not the food, the memories attached to them. I didn't understand until she explained with the desperate clarity of someone running out of time. Every MRE represents a moment when a Marine wasn't hungry. Thousands of Marines, decades of being fed, being satisfied. All that collective memory, it's stored in our relationship to the food. She was right. Military rations weren't just calories. They were symbols of a society that could feed its warriors, evidence of abundance so complete that we took nourishment for granted. Doc caught on first. The institutional memory. Not just our individual experiences, but the Corps' promise that Marines don't go hungry. Ever. Dmitri tilted his head, listening to something we couldn't hear. Yes, he said softly. We can feel it. The certainty, the assumption that food will always be there. What are you proposing? I asked Chen. We give them, not our food, but our confidence in having food, our certainty that we'll never starve. Let them feed on the Marine Corps' promise instead of our individual satisfaction. It was brilliant and terrible. The Corps had spent 247 years building an identity around never leaving Marines behind, never letting Marines go without. That collective confidence, that institutional certainty, it was a kind of spiritual nourishment that had sustained Marines through impossible situations. But giving it away would mean more than losing our individual ability to feel satisfied. It would mean losing faith in the institution that had defined our identities. The children around us grew still, sensing the possibility of a different kind of feeding. Through the radio, Martinez's voice returned, stronger. Sergeant, they're listening. They can hear it. The promise. Petrov nodded grimly. Is like breaking bread in church. You give not just food, but faith that food will always exist. The building continued to shift around us, passages multiplying, leading deeper into the network of chambers where hunger had been concentrated and preserved like a geological formation. But now the children weren't trying to herd us downward. They were waiting to see if we would choose sacrifice over survival. If we do this, I said, we lose more than the ability to feel full. We lose trust in the Corps, in the system, in the promise that someone will always take care of Marines. But they get to rest, Chen replied, looking at the children with something approaching maternal protectiveness. 70 years of counting backward from their last meal. They get to stop counting. It wasn't really a choice. We were dying anyway. starving in accelerated time as the children drew strength from our diminishing energy. But this way, our deaths would mean something. This way, the hunger would finally find satisfaction. I pulled out my MRE packet, beef stew, menu 3, packed with the institutional confidence of a military that had never let its people starve. But instead of opening it, I held it out toward Dmitri. "This represents more than food," I said formally, using the tone reserved for ceremonies. "This represents the promise that Marines are never forgotten, never abandoned, never left to go hungry. Take it. Take the promise." Dmitri's translucent hands closed around the packet, and immediately I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not hunger, something deeper. The loss of certainty. The sudden, terrifying knowledge that promises could be broken, that institutions could fail, that no one was guaranteed anything. Doc and Chen followed my lead, each offering their rations not as food, but as symbols of faith. As the children accepted them, I watched my Marines' faces change. The confident bearing of professional soldiers gave way to something more fragile, more human. Through the radio, Martinez's voice came clear and strong. "Sergeant, I can see daylight. There's a way out. The hunger, it's satisfied. It's finally satisfied." The children began to fade, but not disappearing, transforming. Their hollow eyes filled with something that might have been peace. Their empty bowls, for the first time in 70 years, no longer felt empty. "Spasibo," Dmitri whispered as his form dissolved into motes of light. "Thank you." The building returned to normal concrete and steel. The passages sealed themselves. The temperature rose to merely cold instead of supernaturally frigid. But we were changed. Fundamentally, permanently changed. We'd survived by giving up our faith in survival itself. When the rescue helicopters found us 6 hours later, we were functional Marines who could follow orders and complete missions. But we were also Marines who would never again assume that someone else would take care of us. We'd learned to count backward from our last meal. And in learning that, we'd finally understood what sacrifice really meant. Martinez made it out. Changed, like all of us, but alive. The Corps transferred us to different units within 48 hours. Standard procedure for classified incidents that never officially happened. I still carry the notebook Martinez kept in those tunnels. His handwriting, documenting the moment hunger becomes a living thing. The last entry. "Some promises are worth breaking if breaking them feeds those who were never promised anything." Subscribe before the next story finds your door. Comment your location. Let's see how far the sound of counting carries. Some kinds of empty never get filled. They just learn to share the space,